They stabbed a homeless man and walked away. No arrest. No consequences. Just another Tuesday for these rich kids who'd been untouchable for years. The teachers knew. The principal covered it up. But there was one thing nobody knew. That homeless man had just saved the daughter of Toledo's most feared Hells Angels leader. 24 hours later, the roar of 250 motorcycles shook every window in that school. The Brotherhood had arrived. And they weren't leaving until justice was served their way. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. Let me tell you about a man the world forgot. His name was Duncan Hale. He was 23 years old, barefoot, and homeless. For 3 months, he had been sleeping behind the dumpster near Riverton High School in Toledo, Ohio, curled up on a flattened cardboard box that barely kept the cold concrete from leaching into his bones. Night after night, he laid there beneath the open sky, exposed to rain, wind, and the steady indifference of the world moving around him. Duncan owned almost nothing. He wore the same clothes every day. A faded green sleeveless tank top with a small hole near the hem, red cargo shorts stained with dirt, grease, and time, and nothing else. No shoes. No jacket. No bag. His dark brown hair hung into his eyes, uncut and uneven. Stubble shadowed his face, rough and unkempt. His hands were cracked, calloused, and permanently smudged with grime, the kind of hands that told a story no one had bothered to hear. Each morning, as the sun rose over the school grounds, students passed him on their way to class. Some slowed for a second, curiosity flickering across their faces before being swallowed by discomfort. Most never looked at him at all. They laughed, checked their phones, complained about homework, and stepped around his presence as if he were an obstacle rather than a person. To them, he was background noise. A shape. A problem someone else was supposed to handle. Teachers arrived in their cars, parking just a short distance away. They gathered their bags, locked their doors, and walked past without a word. No one asked Duncan where he came from. No one asked if he needed help. No one asked his name. He existed within arm's reach of hundreds of people every day, yet remained completely unseen. Duncan wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't beg for money or food. He didn't harass anyone or cause disturbances. He simply existed in a space no one wanted to acknowledge. He slept, he woke, he waited. For warmth. For daylight. For the world to notice him, even briefly. There is something deeply unsettling about how easy it is to erase a human being without ever laying a hand on them. Duncan Hale became invisible not because he disappeared, but because everyone else chose to look away. The school bell rang. Classes began. Life continued, orderly and routine, while a young man lay forgotten behind a dumpster, just feet from a building filled with people. For weeks, nothing changed. Days blended into nights. Nights bled into mornings. And Duncan remained there, silent and ignored, a constant presence that no one truly saw. But indifference has a way of ending abruptly. Because on October 17th, the quiet, forgotten man behind Riverton High School would no longer be something people could step around or pretend wasn't there. On that day, Duncan Hale would become impossible to ignore. Kelly Mercer was 18 years old, a senior at Riverton High School, and by most measures, she was exactly where she was supposed to be in life. She played volleyball, kept her grades up, and talked often about what she wanted to do after graduation. That Tuesday, she stayed late after school for practice, running drills long after the hallways had gone quiet and the building had begun to empty. Her father worked nights as a long-haul trucker. He was used to being on the road, used to trusting that his daughter could take care of herself for a few extra hours. Kelly had told him she'd catch a ride home with a teammate once practice wrapped up. It was a simple plan, the kind families make every day without a second thought. But plans change. By the time practice ended, the ride she'd counted on was gone. One teammate had left early. Another had car trouble. Kelly didn't make a fuss about it. She slung her backpack over one shoulder, pulled out her phone, and started walking through the parking lot toward the street. It was late enough that the campus felt different, quieter, heavier. Most of the cars were gone. The lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. Kelly walked alone, unaware that she was no longer alone. She had no idea that 5 boys were watching her from the shadows, tracking her steps, waiting for the right moment. She didn't know that they had noticed her leave the building by herself. She didn't know that they had already decided she was vulnerable. and she had no idea that the small, worn patch stitched onto her backpack, a faded Harley-Davidson logo her father had given her years earlier, was about to save her life. The boys stepped out from between two parked cars, sudden and deliberate, blocking her path. Kelly recognized them immediately. Tyler Brentwood, Jordan Casper, Luke Morrison, Evan Chase, Seth Caldwell. They weren't strangers. They weren't outsiders lurking at the edge of campus. They were students at Riverton High, faces she'd passed in the hallways, names she'd heard called during attendance. Boys who wore expensive shoes and drove nicer cars than most teachers could afford. Boys whose parents sat on boards, donated to school programs, and made phone calls that carried weight. They came from families with money. A lot of it. The kind of money that smoothed over mistakes and softened consequences. The kind of money that made problems disappear before they ever became public. As they closed in, the air around Kelly seemed to tighten. Her phone felt suddenly inadequate in her hand, a flimsy shield against what was unfolding. She sensed the shift immediately. The way laughter drained from the night, the way something unspoken but dangerous settled into place. This was the moment where fear begins, not with screaming or chaos, but with the quiet realization that you are outnumbered, isolated, and being sized up. And if you've ever felt powerless watching bullies win, if you've ever seen silence protect the wrong people, remember this moment. Because what happened next would show exactly what can occur when silence finally breaks. Tyler spoke first, his voice calm, almost amused. "Walking alone, Kelly? That's not smart." Kelly didn't answer. She kept walking, her pace quickening, every instinct in her body telling her to get away. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she tightened her grip on her phone, already imagining how far it was to the street, how close she was to safety. They followed. "We're just being friendly," Jordan said, his words coated in laughter. The others laughed too, but there was nothing light about it. No humor. Just a hollow, taunting sound that raised the hair on the back of her neck and made the night feel smaller, more suffocating. Kelly broke into a run. They were faster. Footsteps thundered behind her, closing the distance in seconds. Hands reached out. Jordan caught her backpack and yanked hard. The strap dug into her shoulder as she was pulled backward, her balance ripped away. She hit the pavement hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Her phone flew from her hand and skittered across the asphalt, disappearing beneath a parked car. She tried to scramble up, panic flooding her chest. Tyler stepped forward and pulled something from his jacket. A knife. The blade was about 4 inches long, clean and sharp, and when he tilted it, the streetlight caught the steel, sending a cold flash through the darkness. In that moment, the situation crossed a line it could never uncross. What had begun as intimidation had turned into something far more dangerous. That was when Duncan Hale woke up. He had been sleeping 20 feet away, hidden behind the dumpster, his body curled against the chill of the night. The shouting tore him from a restless sleep. He pushed himself upright, bare feet pressing into broken glass and cigarette butts, pain flaring but barely registering. His eyes adjusted to the darkness just in time to see them. 5 boys. 1 girl on the ground. A knife. Duncan had nothing. No weapon. No shoes. No phone to call for help. No one who would come running if he shouted. For months, he had been invisible, ignored, treated like part of the trash piled around him. But here's what you need to understand about Duncan Hale. He had spent 3 months watching those boys. He had seen them shove younger students into lockers. He had watched them corner kids near the edge of the lot, blocking their paths just to see the fear in their faces. He had heard them laugh at a disabled student struggling to get to his car, their jokes sharp and cruel. And he had watched teachers notice, hesitate, and then walk away, choosing convenience over confrontation. Every day, Duncan saw what happened when no one stepped in. By that night, Duncan Hale had nothing left to lose. He rose to his feet, straightened his back, and walked out from behind the dumpster. No hesitation, no shouting, just steady movement, barefoot and determined, heading straight toward the group gathered under the flickering light. "Leave her alone." The voice was quiet, calm, almost gentle. It didn't match the chaos of the moment, and that was what made it cut through the night. Tyler turned first. He saw Duncan standing there, barefoot, dirty, thin, bleeding already from cuts no one noticed. Tyler laughed, a short, sharp sound filled with contempt. "The hell are you?" he sneered. "Go back to your dumpster, trash." Duncan didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He stepped forward instead, placing his body between Tyler and Kelly, blocking the knife with nothing but himself. I said, "Leave her alone." For a split second, everything hung still. Breath. Shadows. The faint buzz of the streetlight overhead. That was when Seth pulled a second knife. It happened fast, faster than fear could fully register. Duncan reacted on instinct. He shoved Kelly backward with all the force he had left. She stumbled, caught herself, and then she was moving, scrambling to her feet, turning, running. Tyler lunged. The blade drove into Duncan's side, just below his ribs. The impact stole the air from his lungs. He gasped and staggered, pain blooming hot and deep through his torso. Before he could recover, Jordan slashed at his arm. Blood sprayed across the pavement, dark and sudden, marking the ground beneath them. Duncan didn't scream. He reached out with his bleeding arm and clamped his hand around Tyler's wrist, fingers slick, grip desperate. He held on with everything he had, planting his feet, refusing to let go. "Run," he shouted. Kelly was already 30 feet away. She turned, looking back over her shoulder, frozen in terror at the sight of him still standing there, still fighting. "Run!" Something in his voice broke through. Kelly turned and ran harder, faster, away from the parking lot, away from the knives, away from the boys who had chosen her as a target. The moment she was gone, everything unraveled. Panic set in. Tyler wrenched his arm free. The spell broke. All 5 boys scattered, bolting in different directions, disappearing into the darkness, sudden cowards fleeing consequences. They vanished like roaches when the lights come on. Duncan collapsed. His legs gave out beneath him, and he hit the pavement hard. Blood pooled under his body, spreading into the cracks of the asphalt. His vision blurred, the world narrowing to sound and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, faint at first, then growing louder. Kelly must have found someone. She must have called for help. As Duncan lay there, struggling to stay conscious, his thoughts drifted to something small and strange. The Harley-Davidson patch on her backpack. The worn stitching. The symbol he didn't recognize yet. As his eyes finally closed, he didn't know what it meant. But he would. Duncan Hale survived. Barely. The EMTs arrived minutes after Kelly's call for help. They found Duncan unconscious, his body surrounded by blood that had soaked into the pavement beneath him. One stab wound to his torso. 3 deep slash wounds across his arms and chest. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow. They worked fast, loading him into the ambulance, fighting to keep him alive as the doors slammed shut and the sirens cut through the night. At Toledo Memorial, doctors rushed him straight into emergency surgery. 17 stitches closed torn flesh. A blood transfusion replaced what he had lost. Nearly 30% of his blood volume was gone by the time they stabilized him. For hours, his life hung in a fragile balance, dependent on machines, pressure, and luck. 18 hours later, Duncan opened his eyes. The first face he saw was not a doctor's. It belonged to a man sitting quietly in a chair beside his hospital bed. Marcus Mercer. They called him Reaper. He stood 6'3", built like a wall, his leather vest heavy with patches earned over decades. Skull rings wrapped 3 of his fingers. His arms were thick, corded with muscle and scars that told stories of their own. He was a member of the Hells Angels, Toledo Charter. And he was Kelly's father. Marcus didn't speak right away. He just sat there, eyes red, jaw locked tight. He wasn't crying, but grief and fury sat heavy on him, barely contained. His massive hands were clasped together, knuckles white, as if he were praying, or trying to keep himself from tearing the room apart. Finally, he leaned forward. "You saved my daughter," Marcus said. His voice cracked despite himself. "You don't know me. You don't know her. You had every reason to keep walking." He swallowed hard. "But you didn't." Duncan tried to respond, but his throat burned, dry and raw from the breathing tube. The words wouldn't come. Marcus lifted a hand, stopping him gently. "The boys who did this," he said. "Their names. I need you to tell me their names." There was no thread in his voice, no raised tone, just a quiet certainty that made the request heavier than a demand. Duncan told him everything. He described the parking lot, the knives, the laughter. He named them all. Tyler Brentwood, Jordan Casper, Luke Morrison, Evan Chase, Seth Caldwell. Every detail he could remember, laid out between shallow breaths and long pauses. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Duncan finished, Marcus nodded slowly. He reached into his vest, pulled out his phone, and stood. He made one call. "Brothers," he said into the phone. "Tomorrow morning. Riverton High. Full charter. Bring everyone." He ended the call and turned back to Duncan. "You rest now," Marcus said quietly. "We'll handle this." As he stepped away from the bed, a low, ominous rumble seemed to settle into the air, the promise of engines, of movement, of something coming that could no longer be stopped. The next morning, the sun rose over Riverton High School like it always did, casting long shadows across the front steps as students began to arrive. Tyler Brentwood walked through the doors as if nothing had happened. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm. There was no urgency in his stride, no hint of concern in his eyes. Jordan Casper was already at his locker, laughing loudly with friends, recounting something trivial as if the previous night didn't exist. Luke Morrison sat in the cafeteria, eating breakfast, scrolling on his phone. Evan Chase and Seth Caldwell entered together, backpacks slung over their shoulders, joking as they moved down the hallway. Not one of them looked worried. Why would they? Here's what you need to understand about these 5 boys. This wasn't their first time. 6 months earlier, Tyler had put a sophomore in the hospital with a broken jaw. The incident barely made a ripple. His father's lawyers stepped in. No charges were filed. The victim's family received payment for medical bills, quietly, in exchange for silence. The school filed paperwork. The record vanished. Jordan and Seth had been suspended twice for attacking a disabled student named Aaron Mills in the locker room. They punched him, took his clothes, left him naked, shaking, and crying on the tile floor. The initial punishment was severe until their parents intervened. After a $50,000 donation to the school's new gymnasium fund, their suspension was reduced to 3 days. Luke Morrison had been accused of sexual assault by 2 different girls. 2 separate cases. Both were buried. Both families accepted settlement money. Both signed non-disclosure agreements. Luke stayed enrolled. His future remained intact. Evan Chase's uncle sat on the school board. You can see where this is going. These weren't just bullies. They were protected bullies. Untouchable. The school knew. The teachers knew. The administration knew. Everyone had seen something. Everyone had heard rumors. And again, they chose silence. That morning, Tyler walked past Mrs. Henderson, his English teacher. She had witnessed him harassing Aaron Mills more times than she could count. She lowered her eyes and kept walking. Jordan passed Coach Paulson in the hallway and slapped him a high five. Coach Paulson had personally seen Jordan shove a freshman down the stairs the year before. He smiled and nodded like nothing was wrong. Principal Richard Dalton saw all 5 boys that morning. He knew about the attack behind the school. The police had already contacted him. He knew a homeless man lay in a hospital bed because of what had happened in that parking lot. He said nothing. Lockers slammed. Bells rang. Teachers called roll. Lessons began. The machinery of normalcy rolled forward without hesitation. And if you believe bullies should face consequences, if you believe silence is part of the crime, then say it out loud. Refuse to look away. Refuse to excuse it. Because every voice raised against this kind of cowardice is a stand against the system that lets it survive. That morning, classes began as usual, and the silence held. While Tyler Brentwood sat in his first period history class, tapping his pen against the desk and half listening to a lecture he'd heard before, something else was unfolding far beyond the walls of Riverton High School. Marcus Mercer's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the call he made the night before. Hell's Angels don't just protect their own families. They protect the brotherhood. And when one of their daughters is attacked, when a man with nothing steps in and takes a knife for her, the response is immediate, absolute, and collective. This wasn't just Toledo. Word traveled the way it always does in that world. Quietly at first, then faster, chapter to chapter, state to state. Cleveland answered with 23 writers. Columbus sent 18. Detroit sent 31. Chicago sent 44. Pennsylvania sent 27 more. Each call carried the same message, stripped of drama and excess. A girl was attacked. A man did the right thing. No one else did. By mid-morning, 250 Hells Angels were moving toward Toledo from 6 different states. They didn't all ride together. That would draw too much attention. Some came in semi-trucks, others in pickup trucks or cars. But most of them came the way they preferred, on motorcycles. Harleys. Indians. Triumphs. Engines rolled to life in garages and parking lots across the Midwest. One by one, then in clusters, then in long, deliberate lines. The sound carried through towns and along highways like distant thunder, low and unignorable. They gathered on the east side of Toledo at Marcus Mercer's clubhouse, a warehouse wrapped in chain-link fencing and razor wire, the kind of place built to keep the outside world at a distance. Inside, the air was thick with oil, leather, and quiet anticipation. Marcus stood on a wooden crate so everyone could see him. He didn't shout. "My daughter was attacked," he said. "A homeless man, a man with nothing, took a knife for her. He's in the hospital right now because he did what was right." No one spoke. 250 men and women stood listening, eyes fixed, bodies still. "The boys who did it are in school right now," Marcus continued. "They're walking around like nothing happened. The school knows their names. The police know their names. Nobody's doing a damn thing." His voice dropped lower, steadier, more dangerous. "We're going to make sure they do something." There was no cheer, no roar of approval, just nods, zippers closing, helmets being picked up, engines being primed. The decision had already been made. Back at Riverton High School, the day moved on as planned. Bells rang. Students shifted between classes. Tyler Brentwood sat in third-period chemistry, slouched in his chair, half focused on the board, completely unaware of what was moving toward him. Then he heard it. At first, it was barely noticeable. A low sound, distant enough to dismiss. But it didn't fade. It grew. A rumble. Steady. Layered. Multiplying. The kind of sound that doesn't belong to a single vehicle, or even a few. The kind of sound that fills the air and makes the windows vibrate just slightly. A sound that feels less like noise and more like a warning. Tyler looked up from his desk. The rumble was getting closer. The windows began to shake. At first, students thought it was thunder, the low roll of a storm moving in. Some glanced outside, expecting dark clouds. But the sky was clear, blue, calm. The sound didn't fade. It grew louder, closer, a deep, layered rumble that vibrated through glass and bone. Mrs. Henderson stopped teaching mid-sentence, the words dying in her throat. Conversation stalled. Chairs scraped as students drifted toward the windows, curiosity shifting quickly into something else. What they saw defied explanation. 250 motorcycles rolled down the street toward Riverton High School in perfect formation. 6 rows deep, leather vests heavy with patches. American flags fluttering lightly. On every back, the same unmistakable symbol, the Hell's Angels' death head. They weren't racing. They weren't showing off. They moved slowly, deliberately, like a funeral procession or an execution march. The motorcycles fanned out and surrounded the school completely. Every entrance, every exit, the parking lot, the street, a solid, unbroken perimeter. One by one, they stopped. Engines idled for a moment, a low mechanical growl hanging in the air. Then the engines shut off. Silence. Inside the building, fear moved faster than sound. Students pressed against windows. Teachers froze in hallways. Principal Richard Dalton's face drained of color as he watched the crowd outside, understanding too late that this was no protest and no coincidence. Marcus Mercer climbed off his bike. He walked toward the main entrance without urgency. Behind him, 249 brothers and sisters followed, boots hitting the ground in unison. No shouting, no threats, just presence. On the second floor, Tyler Brentwood saw them. His face went pale. Jordan Casper grabbed his arm, panic cracking through his voice. "We need to go? Now." It was already too late. Marcus pushed through the front doors. The Brotherhood followed, leather creaking softly, boots echoing on linoleum. Not a single word was spoken. The receptionist reached for the phone, fingers trembling. A woman stepped forward and gently placed her hand over it. "No calls," Valerie Torres said quietly. "Not yet." Principal Dalton emerged from his office, forcing authority into his posture, failing to hide the fear in his eyes. "You can't be here," he said. "This is private property. I'm calling the police." Marcus stopped 3 feet from him. "The police are already on their way," Marcus replied. "We called them, and you're going to want them here, because we're about to tell them what you've been hiding." Dalton's mouth opened, closed. No words came. Marcus turned to the hallway, his voice carrying effortlessly. "Tyler Brentwood, Jordan Casper, Luke Morrison, Evan Chase, Seth Caldwell. You have 10 seconds to show yourselves, or we start going classroom to classroom." No one moved. 10. Silence. 9. A door opened on the second floor. 8. Tyler stepped into the hallway, hands shaking, face flushed with panic. 7. Jordan followed. Then Luke. Evan appeared. Seth came last. They descended the stairs slowly, every step heavy. The entire school watched, students frozen in doorways, teachers lining the halls, no one looking away now. When the 5 reached the bottom, Marcus spoke. Last night, these 5 attacked an 18-year-old girl. They pulled knives. They would have done unthinkable things if a homeless man hadn't stepped in and taken a knife for her. He's in the hospital right now, and they walked in here this morning like nothing happened. He turned to Dalton. And you knew, didn't you? Dalton said nothing. Marcus raised his phone. This is security footage from your own cameras, he said. These same 5 attacking a disabled student. Aaron Mills. They beat him, stripped him, left him traumatized. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the video played. Teachers looked away. Students stared in horror. You buried it, Marcus continued. Took a donation and made it disappear. Sirens wailed outside as police arrived. Marcus lowered the phone. Not anymore. 6 Toledo police cruisers rolled to a stop outside Riverton High School. The Hells Angels didn't block them. They didn't argue. They parted calmly, deliberately, creating a clear path. This wasn't a standoff. It was something else entirely. Inside the building, the weight in the air shifted as uniformed officers entered. At the front was Detective Sarah Rains. She had been assigned to the Duncan Hale case earlier that morning. She had already listened to the 911 call, already reviewed preliminary reports, already identified 5 primary suspects. What she hadn't expected was this. Marcus Mercer stepped forward and handed her a thick folder. Everything you need, he said evenly. Names, witnesses, video evidence, and documentation showing the school's been covering for these kids for years. Detective Rains opened the folder. Her jaw tightened as she turned the pages. Incident reports that went nowhere. Security footage labeled and time-stamped. Statements from students who had never been interviewed. Patterns that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. She looked up once, just once, and nodded. That was when Tyler Brentwood panicked. He took a step backward, then another, eyes darting toward the nearest exit. He turned and tried to run. 2 riders stepped into his path. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. Tyler froze where he stood, breath shallow, bravado gone. Tyler Brentwood, Detective Rains said, her voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. You are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon. She guided his hands behind his back and secured the cuffs, reading his rights as his shoulders slumped. The clink of metal echoed through the hallway, sharp and final. One by one, the others followed. Jordan Casper broke down first, tears streaking down his face as he sobbed and protested that it wasn't supposed to go this far. Luke Morrison shouted about his father's lawyers, about lawsuits and influence and mistakes that could be fixed. Evan Chase said nothing at all, staring at the floor as if he could disappear into it. Seth Caldwell hyperventilated, panic overwhelming him as the reality he had never faced finally arrived. They were led away in handcuffs. The entire school watched. Phones came out. Videos were recorded. Whispers spread like wildfire. Within hours, the footage would be everywhere. Shared, replayed, dissected. For once, the story wouldn't be buried. In a classroom doorway down the hall, Aaron Mills stood quietly. The same student who had been beaten, stripped, and humiliated months earlier. The one no one had protected. Tears streamed down his face as he watched the boys who had tormented him being escorted past, powerless for the first time. They weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. Finally, someone had believed him. Finally, someone had stood up. And for the first time at Riverton High School, justice wasn't looking away. But the Hells Angels weren't finished. While the 5 boys were being loaded into police cruisers outside, Marcus Mercer and 6 other riders turned and walked calmly down the hallway toward the administrative wing. Their boots echoed with purpose. Detective Sarah Rains followed closely behind them. They entered Principal Richard Dalton's office without knocking. Dalton stood behind his desk, stiff and defensive, hands braced against the polished wood as if it might anchor him. He forced his shoulders back, clinging to authority that was already slipping away. Mr. Dalton, Marcus said evenly, his voice low and controlled. We need to talk about your pattern of obstruction. Dalton scoffed, attempting indignation. I don't know what you're talking about. This is harassment. Marcus didn't argue. He simply placed another folder on the desk and slid it forward. This is harassment, Marcus said. 17 complaints filed against those 5 boys over the last 3 years. 17. Physical assault, sexual misconduct, theft, vandalism. Every single one buried. He paused. Want to guess how much money their parents donated to this school during that same period? Dalton stared at the folder. Said nothing. $347,000. Marcus continued. I had a lawyer pull the financial records this morning. Public school. Public records. The room went quiet. Detective Raines stepped forward. Mr. Dalton, she said, I need you to answer a question honestly. Did you have knowledge of the attack on Aaron Mills? Silence. Did you personally witness any of the incidents involving these 5 students and choose not to report them? More silence. Then a voice came from the doorway. He witnessed all of them. Everyone turned. Mrs. Carol Henderson, the English teacher, stood there, hands trembling, tears streaking down her face. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. I tried to report them, she said. Multiple times. He told me to drop it. Said their families were important to the school's funding. Said it would ruin my career if I kept pushing. Another figure appeared beside her. Coach Paulson. He told me the same thing. The coach said quietly. After Jordan pushed that freshman down the stairs, I filed a report. He buried it. Then another teacher stepped forward. And another. 5 in total. Different voices. Different moments. The same story. Over and over again. Principal Dalton hadn't ignored the violence. He had managed it. Cataloged it. Buried it. He had protected 5 dangerous students because their parents wrote checks. Detective Raines reached for her handcuffs. Richard Dalton, she said, you are being detained for questioning regarding obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal criminal activity, and failure to report suspected child abuse. Dalton's face drained of color. This is insane, he stammered. You can't. We can, Raines replied. And we are. No one clapped. No one cheered. The Hells Angels stood silently as Dalton was led out of his office, past the desk where he had silenced victims and protected predators, past the teachers he had threatened, past the door he once controlled. Justice didn't raise its voice. It didn't need to. It simply did the work. 3 days later, Duncan Hale woke up to something he hadn't seen in years. Color. His hospital room was filled with flowers, crowding the windowsill, lining the counters, their scent thick in the air. And standing among them were people, leather vests, quiet voices, familiar faces he hadn't expected to ever see again. Marcus Mercer sat beside his bed. But this time, he wasn't alone. 8 other members of the Brotherhood stood around the room, filling the space with a presence that felt steady, protective, not intimidating, anchoring. How you feeling? Marcus asked. Duncan shifted, trying to sit up. Pain shot through his side and arm. He winced, the stitches pulling tight. Like I got stabbed, he said hoarsely. Multiple times. Marcus exhaled a short breath that might have been a laugh. Yeah, he said. About that. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it carefully before placing it on Duncan's lap. That's a lease, Marcus said. 1-bedroom apartment on Miller Street. First year's rent paid. Furniture included. Duncan stared at the paper. He didn't reach for it. Didn't unfold it. His brow furrowed, confusion and disbelief wrestling across his face. I can't, he said quietly. I don't have money. Marcus shook his head. You don't need money, he said. You have brothers now. Something broke. Duncan's eyes filled with tears, fast and uncontained. His chest hitched as he struggled to breathe around the weight of it. I'm not, his voice cracked. I'm nobody. Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. You're the man who saved my daughter, he said. You had nothing, and you gave everything. That makes you somebody. A woman stepped forward from the back of the room. Jackie Morrison. They called her Chains. We also got you a job, she said. Auto shop on 5th. Owner's a friend of ours. You start when you're healed up. Duncan tried to speak. No words came. He just nodded, over and over, overwhelmed by something he hadn't felt in a long time. Security. Marcus stood and placed a heavy hand on Duncan's shoulder. You're not invisible anymore, brother, he said. You never will be again. Days later, Duncan noticed something on the small table beside his bed. A familiar patch. The worn Harley-Davidson logo from Kelly's backpack, now framed, clean, preserved. A symbol of the moment everything changed. 2 weeks later, Duncan walked into his new apartment. There was a bed, a couch, a kitchen table. Clean clothes hung neatly in the closet. The refrigerator hummed softly, stocked with food. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. On the counter sat a handwritten note. "Welcome home. The Brotherhood." Duncan Hale sat down on his couch, and cried. For the first time in 5 years, the tears weren't from hunger or cold or pain. They were from finally belonging. The fallout was immediate and total. Within days, the story dominated every local outlet, then spread far beyond Toledo. Tyler Brentwood, Jordan Casper, Luke Morrison, Evan Chase, and Seth Caldwell were each charged as adults. Assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, hate crime enhancements for targeting a homeless individual. The charges were severe, and for the first time in their lives, no one stepped in to soften the landing. Their parents hired the best lawyers money could buy. It didn't matter. The video evidence was overwhelming. Multiple angles, clear audio, timestamps that told an unbroken story. Witness testimony poured in. Students, teachers, bystanders who had stayed silent before but no longer could. The public outrage was relentless, a pressure that refused to ease. Sentencing came swiftly. Tyler Brentwood received 8 years. Jordan Casper received 7. Luke Morrison received 9, compounded by prior buried allegations. Evan Chase received 7. Seth Caldwell received 6. All 5 were sent to separate facilities. No shared protection, no familiar faces. For the first time, they were alone with the consequences of their actions. Principal Richard Dalton was fired immediately. The district moved fast, severing ties before the ink on the charges was dry. He was later charged with obstruction of justice and failure to report child abuse. Facing overwhelming evidence, he pled guilty to avoid trial. His teaching license was permanently revoked. He served 18 months in prison, leaving behind the office where he had quietly traded student safety for donations. Riverton High School closed for an entire semester. A state investigation dissolved the school board and uncovered $1.2 million in misappropriated funds. Corruption stretched back 7 years, woven into budgets, contracts, and conveniently ignored complaints. When the school reopened, it did so under entirely new leadership, with mandatory reporting policies and a zero-tolerance approach to abuse that could no longer be negotiated away. Aaron Mills received a formal apology from the district. Not a quiet letter, a public acknowledgement. He also received a settlement, though no amount could undo what had been taken from him. Still, this time, his story was believed. And Duncan Hale? Duncan still works at the auto shop on 5th Street. He shows up early. He's good with engines. He has grease under his fingernails and stability under his feet. He has an apartment, friends, a place at a table, a brotherhood that will never let him disappear again. Kelly Mercer visits him every Sunday. They drink coffee. They talk about small things. The weather, work, life. They don't talk about that night very often. They don't need to. Some bonds are forged in blood and bravery. Those bonds don't break. And if there's something this story leaves behind, it's this: silence is a choice. And so is standing up. One lets harm grow. The other changes everything. Here's what this story is really about. It's not about motorcycles. It's not about revenge. It's not even about justice. It's about silence. For 3 years, teachers saw abuse and said nothing. They noticed bruises, heard rumors, witnessed cruelty, and